Alright, so this is literally the fifth time I'm attempting this. Unfortunately, I finally got everything right the last time, and the mic was not working appropriately in Shadowplay. So here we go again. Anyway, I'm here to show you how to install Linux on your machine. A lot of people aren't super familiar with the process and somewhat intimidated. I'm going to show you it's not that terribly difficult. I'm going to do it on a virtual machine because I do not feel like it would be, I don't know, that much more beneficial to hook up a game capture device and, you know, wipe out a hard drive and everything like that to do this. I can kind of recreate the process pretty well through the virtual machine, and there shouldn't be any missing steps. But okay, let's go ahead and get going. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new virtual machine. Typical. So if you do happen to set up on a virtual machine and you're learning from me here, I'm going to say that in general, it's okay to use this easy install process, and I use it all the time. But in this particular instance, I want to show everybody the different steps that we go through so that they can do it on their own physical machine, and especially important steps that will be significant if you're installing on a physical machine. They'll be dual or multi-booting. So I'm going to set to install the operating system later, so it does not do the easy installation process. Just letting the virtual machine know what its operating system to expect. Just change the name just for consistency because this is Xubuntu 14 LTS 14.04. Okay, and you don't have to do that. I just did it because I'm kind of anal. Go to next, make a single disk image file of 20 gigabytes. Again, this is a virtual machine, and although there's a little bit of gray area between what is virtual and what's real access to hardware these days, because some of these virtual machines can now directly access hardware, including hard drives. In this particular instance, I'm creating an image file on my hard drive that will act as a hard disk for this. So again, it's 20 gigabyte single file is what I did. And again, the single file is higher performance. I don't know why they complain about multiple files being easier to transfer these days. In reality, well, I guess if you're across large networks, but things move pretty quick on networks these days, so I don't know what the big complaint is. So yeah, single file unless you have some other good reason. I'm not going to customize the hardware any. Okay, now we're ready to go. So this is my virtual machine right here. It has no operating system on it, nothing. If I were to try to start it up, all it's going to do is sit here and spin out looking for something to happen. There's no OS. It is, it is able to talk to the network here, perhaps waiting for network boot or something like that, but there's nothing there. So I'm going to power it off. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is, just like you would on a physical device, I'm going to insert a hard disk, or I mean a disk into the device. So I'm not going to use a physical disk, although you can use a physical drive and plug it in, and it will recognize that. I'm going to use an ISO image file. You can download, depending on your distribution, it's easy to find these ISO image files. They're literally just copies of the CD DVD discs. So I'm effectively placing a disk into the disk tray by selecting the CD DVD device on my virtual machine and putting in a virtual image for it to read from. So now when I press go, it's going to recognize that and it's going to boot. There we go. You can see it's already starting to recognize the Xubuntu 14.04 live CD. And the reason it's called a live CD is because rather than installing, you can choose to load everything up into memory and kind of experience some major features of the operating system without going through the installation process, which is a pretty cool feature. There's a bunch of different Linux distributions out there, so it can be nice to play around with them all. And they all tend to do different things. So they have one for audio video, they have one for hackers, they have like all kinds of different purposes. I feel like Ubuntu is a pretty good all-purpose distribution, and you can install all the other tools you need anyway. So you don't have to get one of those installations, but like for example, if you're a big audio video guy and you want to be working all on free open source software, then you would do it through, there is an AV Linux out there. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and we're not going to do the live CD, we'll just go directly to the install. Normally I would download the updates and third-party software and all that stuff, but I'm just trying to get through this a little quicker. I don't need to do this at the moment. We can always do the updates later. Alright, now here's the part that's probably the most important of this entire installation process. If you have just a single drive, or if you're on a virtual machine and you only plan on having one OS installed, and this is fine, just let the installer guess the correct disk and erase everything and then install Xubuntu on it. However, a lot of times that's not the case. You will be multi-booting, so you need to know what you're doing when you do the partitioning. So I'm going to select something else, although we only have one hard disk and we're not going to do a lot of fancy stuff. I'm going to talk it through just so you kind of understand what's going on a little bit better. Alright, so here we are. We are at the the GUI interface for the partitioning software. And here's what we see. I'm going to point out the important parts. So right up here, you see device. Device is going to be listed as dev SDA is the only device. That basically just means that the computer is only recognizing one hard disk device. And that makes sense because we only fed it one image file. And this kind of fancy looking name is not that complicated in reality. All it means is that the / indicates that that's the root directory. Inside of the root directory there's a devices folder, dev/, and inside of there there is a file SDA which kind of describes the kernel's relationship with the hard drive. So right there, that is basically the device, the file representation of your hard drive is in dev SDA. And that's kind of the equivalent to if you went into Windows Disk Manager, you might see hard disk 1 or hard disk 2 or something like that. Okay, so now what we're doing with this device is we are going to create a partition table and partition the hard drive out for specific purposes. Partitions just being literally parts of the hard drive. So there's a lot of things you can do with this, but there's really only two things you absolutely need to do. And I will go through those right now. The first thing I always like to do is go over the swap space. So what swap space is effectively like a backup space on the hard drive for your RAM. So if you were to run out of RAM, but the kernel leaves more room, it can take inactive stuff or stuff that it's deciding it can put on the back burner out of RAM, put it into swap space, and then utilize that newly freed memory. So swap space is important, especially if you don't have much RAM to begin with. So I'm going to give it, this is a virtual machine with 1 gig of RAM, and I'm going to give it 2 gigabytes of swap space. So I put in the size. You don't need to mess with the type or the location. There's nothing else on here, so it will, it will be just fine. So what you do need to select is use as swap area. So you have 2 gigs of swap space. Okay, now you're still left with a bunch of free space. What are you going to do with this free space? Well, you could create multiple additional partitions, just like some people might create a C and a D partition on their one hard drive in Windows. A lot of times you'll see people creating that separate partition where they have maybe all their images and all their documents, or maybe all their, that's where the Steam games are installed or something like that. So that if the operating system gets corrupt, you can go back and you still have all those files, and you don't have to worry about formatting both partitions simultaneously, because you have broken the hard drive up in that way where you can just leave the other portion intact. And that's kind of the same thing we're doing here. But while you can do that, we aren't going to do that. We're just going to make one single partition. The single partition is going to be mounted to the / or root directory. And basically all that means is associated with that folder, and this root folder is going to be the most like the highest parent folder. Like if you were to be browsing your Windows file system and you know there's that little up arrow that will take you from one folder to its parent folder. Like if you were in My Documents / Pictures or whatever, you hit up, then you would leave pictures up into My Documents. If you were to do the same thing in Linux and keep going up and up and up to parent directories, the ultimate final parent directory is this /. So again, what you can do if you could create multiple operating systems, kind of like creating a C drive, you could create another partition and mount that partition into the home folder or the temp folder. The advantage might be that if you wanted to keep everybody's user files, which are located in the home folder, similar to My Documents or users My Documents, on a separate physical partition or physical hard drive, you can choose to do that, but we don't need to do that. What we're going to do is just allow everything to be installed under one physical partition mounted right here at this highest parent directory, the / root directory. Okay, so now that's all set up. The last thing we need to do now is we need to pay attention to where we're going to start the bootloader. The bootloader is the thing that kind of directs the operating system booting process. The default bootloader for Ubuntu is called grub. And if you aren't careful in a multi-boot situation, you might cause trouble with your Windows installation. One thing to note is if you were installing Linux on a Windows installation and you have Windows 8 and it's one of those UEFI installations, and when you started this installation process, you selected the UEFI USB or DVD drive to boot from. You definitely want to go back and run it in legacy mode because you'll probably restart and not be able to access Windows anymore. So that is definitely one thing to consider. So that's one way you can kill your Windows installation, is by trying to have a Linux and a Windows UEFI system set up, and the other would be to overwrite Windows master boot record. For example, if you had two different physical hard disks and you happen to boot up to the Windows disk as your primary hard disk and you overwrote that master boot record with the grub booting software, you might damage your ability to get inside of Windows if you were to, for example, remove the Linux operating system or the hard drive that it was on there, or if it became corrupted or something like that. So if you do have multiple physical disks, I would recommend that you put the bootloader on the disk with the operating system that it belongs to. So we don't have another hard disk in here. This Linux installation is going on dev SDA, so I will install the bootloader on dev SDA. But if there was like a dev SDB, for example, on a dev SDB there was Windows or a different Linux installation or something like that, then you would want to be careful and not accidentally put the bootloader there if you didn't intend for it to be there in the first place. So you can go ahead and install. Next is close enough. Close enough. Alright, so I'm going to put in some. This is not my typical login, so don't get excited. Not my typical password either. I typically do not go with password 1234, but today for this installation, which I will immediately be deleting after, I'll go ahead and stick with it. I don't recommend that you log in. I recommend against logging in automatically. Again, this is supposed to be your Linux server. You want it to be secure, so require your password. You don't need to encrypt your home folder really. There's not that many instances where you would need to do that, especially if this is physically located inside your house or something you have physical control over and you're not worried about other users on the system getting access. Then the only way people would be able to get access would be if they hacked you or they physically removed the hard disk and popped it in their computer and took ownership that way. So not a huge deal. I don't encrypt my home folder, but you can if you want. It does create problems though if you're sharing files with people and your home folder is encrypted, you're trying to share something on the home folder, you can get some problems there. So again, not necessary for the most part, especially for our purposes. So I'm just going to require my password to log in and not deal with the rest. Okay, so now we're just going to finish up the installation process. This should go fairly quickly. It's a fairly quick and painless process. One of the major benefits of Linux is when you do kill something, and I occasionally do, mostly when I'm doing stuff that is unnecessary, like, you know, there can be some difficulty with installing a proprietary NVIDIA driver or video card driver on this Ubuntu anyway. I don't know if it's like that on the other distributions. I haven't really played with them, and I tend to occasionally kill installations that way because it's more complicated than it should be if you want to do it reliably, and it's a pain in the butt process. I'm really hoping that when SteamOS comes out, it kind of creates a little paradigm shift, and proprietary software and hardware vendors will actually start supporting free and open source software a little bit more, because right now NVIDIA does a really crappy job, and you are likely to tank your installation by installing drivers. And really, let's not kid ourselves. At this point, until SteamOS comes out and starts, making a ding in the market, Linux is not the greatest platform for gaming, except for on the server side. A little bit ironically, there's not that many games available on Steam for Linux, and while I have gotten things to run and run well, it needs to be a little more user friendly. So yeah, it's definitely hard to escape Windows, and even OS X is quite a bit better for being a user playing video games. But one of the benefits is for all other purposes. I mean, I'm a big fan of, for example, the Ubuntu GNOME distribution. It's got a very clean interface, very high efficiency for high workflow. And if you install, like, for example, the Cairo dock on there, you get kind of like an OS X like experience, but with, I would say, with a little bit of tweaking, a higher degree of workflow. And it's really easy to set up. I mean, if you for whatever, let's say your hard drive died and you had to throw in a new hard drive, I can have a new installation running in 15 minutes. It takes me 10 minutes to install everything, and then I just execute a script I created and automatically installs and configures all of my favorite programs. So it's very, very simple versus like with Windows, I can be a complete bear waiting for all the updates and reinstalling everything, and it can just take a long time. I know you can create images and stuff like that with Windows, but the Windows imaging software is not that good yet, and you almost guaranteed to have problems. Okay, so installation's complete. I'm going to go ahead and restart and boot into Windows, and that will, I mean not Windows, but boot into Xubuntu for the first time. It will be the end at that point. Just FYI, if this freezes, this is not the Linux installation's fault. It's been Workstation 11. VMware Workstation 11 has been kind of crappy. Kind of wishing I didn't do the upgrade. Yep, there it goes. Not spinning. So yeah, I didn't have this problem in 10, but whatever. I can still turn it off, and it should boot up just fine. Let me go ahead and eject the hard drive. Or not the hard drive, but the disk image, and I will restart, and I should boot up an Xubuntu without any real trouble. There we are. Let's put in our password. Okay, so that is in. Here we are. We're inside of Xubuntu. It's a very simple looking interface. Again, you can, you could spice it up pretty quick though. I mean, if you wanted the Cairo doc, for example, you can get that, and it really makes the experience a lot nicer. I'll show you that. Oh my God, seriously. That is weird. Okay, whatever. I seem to have forgotten the password I created for myself, even though it should be password 1234. But yeah, it's really easy. You can make things look nice fairly easily. In the meantime, it's time for you to kind of familiarize yourself with the terminal emulator. And this is going to be kind of your new favorite, or I guess your new home. This little box with all the text. You will learn to enjoy it. It's highly efficient once you get over the kind of steep learning curve, and it's very, very powerful. The stuff you can do from the command line in Linux. But we'll go over that a little bit more later. For now, thanks much for watching, and let me know if you have any questions. I'll do my best to help out and answer them. Just keep in mind, I am not a Linux systems administrator or some other expert by any stretch of the imagination. I do this as a hobbyist. I actually work in healthcare, not on the IT side of things, on the clinical side of things. And I do this just for fun. I can answer some questions, and I'm here primarily because I've noticed that a lot of the tutorials and that sort of thing available don't really do a good job explaining why and how. They tend to be for people who already know their way around Linux. Either that, or they're just really terribly dumbed down and not useful. So hopefully this is useful. Like I said, if you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer and help out. But again, just keep in mind, I am not some authority on it. Alright, in the meantime, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.